Hello once again, everybody. I'm meteorologist Sean Sublette, and welcome to Across the Sky, our national Lee Enterprises weather podcast. Lee Enterprises has print and digital operations in 77 locations across the country, including in my home base in Richmond, Virginia. I'm joined by my meteorologist colleagues from across the sky, Matt Holiner in Chicago and Joe Martucci in Atlantic City. At the Jersey Shore, our colleague Kirsten Lang taking some time off in Tulsa with family for a few weeks. Gentlemen, we've got a really good interview today. Our pal here in Richmond, Mike Svettitz, runs Front Page Bets, and we're going to talk about weather and gaming, the weather and gaming industry. I think most of us kind of know about the football situation, but there are other aspects out there as well. Joe, you are an AC man. So talk a little bit about what you know there.
Well, yeah, we're in the actually the capital of sports gaming. Fun fact, Sean, New Jersey actually has more sports gaming revenue than Nevada. And it might sound crazy, but the difference is in Nevada, and this might have changed recently, but I'm not sure, you can only bet in Nevada if you sign up for an account at the casino. In New Jersey, you don't have to go to the casino. You just sign up on your phone wherever you are. It doesn't matter if you're in Cape May or in Sussex County. So we are very ingrained in sports betting here in New Jersey. Of course, do so responsibly. I do so myself. I did pretty good with our March Madness. You know, Mike's going to talk about his don't follow his March Madness picks. Should have followed mine. I had UConn winning. Just saying, I had a future bet on UConn. But it'll be it's a good episode. Mike's a good guy too, and we're happy to have him leading the charge over at Front Page Bets.
And what was interesting for me is that we didn't limit it to just baseball and football, because that's what you kind of think about. Those are the sports, that do get a lot of interest in the betting world. But it was interesting to think about all the different sports that are impacted by weather. And we covered them all, I think. We got through all. We talked about golf. We talked about NASCAR. We talked about horse racing. And at first it doesn't hit you, but then you realize, man, weather has such an impact on so many different sports and betting, therefore. So this was a really fun episode.
Yeah, so we're going to talk to Mike Svettitz about all those things here. I was really fascinated by the NASCAR stuff, the horse racing stuff, tennis, golf, all of that. So that's up ahead with our conversation with Mike Svettitz, General Manager and Content Director of Front Page Bets here at Lee Enterprises.
You are getting sleepy, very sleepy. Your CPAP mask is clamped tightly to your face. Right, my darling?
Yes, dear.
You will not toss and turn through the whooshing. You will not throw the mask. You will not dislodge the hose and blast air all about the bedroom. You will not wake me, your loving husband, who yearns for even a single night of uninterrupted slumber. Please.
It's not working, Harold.
People who struggle with CPAP have partners who struggle too. Luckily, now there's Inspire. Inspire treats the root cause of sleep apnea inside your body. While you sleep, Inspire keeps your airway clear so you can breathe normally and rest comfortably. No mask, no hose, just sleep.
When I snap my fingers, you will remember to visit inspiresleep.com to learn more.
Inspire, sleep apnea innovation. Inspire is not for everyone. Talk to your doctor to see if it's right for you and review important safety information at inspiresleep.com.
Our guest this week is Mike Svettitz. He's the General Manager and Content Director of Front Page Bets here at Lee Enterprises. Now, that's our sports and betting portal to educate, inform, and of course, entertain sports fans from across the country, especially in this blossoming sports betting enterprise that is out there. Mike, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast, man.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. It's awesome to be here.
So I think intuitively we understand that there is always going to be some kind of weather impact on a game, right? I know football comes to mind at first, but can you talk a little bit about some of the nuances that aren't obvious to the casual observer? Could you speak to baseball first, since that one might be even less obvious?
Yeah, I think, anytime you're playing outdoors, you always got to take the weather into effect, as you guys know. I mean, some of the most popular, or the most popular content on any of our websites here at Lee Enterprises, or even in your local TV market, is the weather, right? What's going to do today, our apps, everybody's got the weather app. So then when you put sports into it, you always are, Is it going to rain? How cold? For the fan perspective, right? Is it going to rain? How cold? How warm? What time's the game? What's going on with all that stuff? So it's so important. And then when you come in from a competitive perspective, from players to coaching and the way you game plan, the way you scheme, and then what we do in sports betting, if you are going to place a bet, if you're looking to wager on a game legally, and now it's legal across the sports betting is legal in more than 30 states across the country, including Washington, D.C. So, if you're placing a legal bet and you're looking into all that kind of stuff, you want to know, how can I get the best advantage, right? So where's the best advantage? How can I maximize what I know versus what intangibles are out there in sports? We all know you can't predict. That's why they're, sports, even the underdogs have their day. But in sports betting particularly, and in competition, you want to be able to control, or at least know about everything that you can. And you can't control the weather, but if you know going in how this is going to affect, whether, if you mentioned baseball, whether it's going to affect the ball flight, the pitching, just kind of how cold or warm it is, all that stuff takes into account. Now, baseball is a little bit different. Football probably has the most impact. The weather has the most impact in football, just because you're putting the ball in the air a lot, kicking, game planning, how hot, how cold, all has an effect on everybody across the board. Baseball, it's a little bit different because there's not so much margin going on. There's not, you pitch, you hit, you catch, and I think, and I'm not trying to simplify baseball and saying it's less complicated, but I think the impacts on weather are fewer at a baseball game than they would be, let's say, at a football game. So, but there are some things that do happen that can control that, but it's not so much almost who's going to win or lose because of the weather. It's more on the proposition bet, more of a player bet. How is this pitcher going to perform in the heat? How's this pitcher going to perform when it's raining? How's this batter going to perform at Coors Field in Colorado with thinner altitude versus in Miami where it's really humid and moist all the time? How is all that going to play an effect in the proposition bets? And those, for anybody who doesn't know what a prop bet is, it's a proposition of a player or a team will do X. Win or lose, that's not a prop bet. That's just the money line or against the spread, over, under, how many points they'll score, over this or under that. But a prop bet is, let's say, Aaron Judge will hit 2 home runs tonight, plus or minus, the odds are, and if it's minus, 100, that means for every $100 you bet, you get that back. So minus 100, basically you have to bet 100 to just stay even, to get 100 back. If it's plus, so if it's minus, anything in the minuses means it's probably gonna happen. The odds are that it will happen. Anything in the plus means it's not as likely to happen. So, and that's why you see a lot of these proposition bets at 1.5 instead of 2 home runs, it's 1.5. So you get 2 home runs, you pushed if you bet it. So 1.5, either over 1, which is 2, obviously, or under, which is, 1 or less. So you look at those kind of bets in baseball and how the weather is going to affect. All right, so we're playing a Wrigley Field. The wind's blowing out. It's a day game. You're going to have a better, opportunity to hit home runs versus if you're playing, let's say, at Old Candlestick Park in San Francisco where the wind swirls and you just never know which way it's going to go. So all of that comes into effect, but it's not so much cool, win or lose, yes, and that all depends. If you got a guy that hits 5 home runs, chances are that team's going to win, but more for the proposition bet, more for the player, individual bet, how they're going to perform in the weather, and in that time and space. So we can talk a lot more about individual things like that, but overall, I think that's kind of how weather will affect baseball in particular, and, obviously any outdoor sport. And indoor, be that as it may, how much does the weather affect the indoor? Well, There's been times where at hockey games, weather has affected the ice. And, I remember with the Flyers, and I think it was the Islanders back in the 80s in a playoff game. It was so warm that the condensation was coming up from the ice. It was almost like the fog bowl inside, and, times I remember even in Richmond, Virginia, there was a basketball game played at the old Richmond Coliseum right up the road from where we're at. From where I'm at, and they had the ice underneath. They didn't clear the ice, and the ice was too much condensation on the floor. They had to stop the game. I think it was Michigan and UVA. This was back in the 80s or 90s where they couldn't play the game because the floor was so slippery because the ice was coming up through the floorboards. So it happens on indoor events, just less likely, more so than outdoor.
Hey, Mike, it's Joe here, and on behalf of everyone in the state of New Jersey, we just want to say you're welcome for having sports betting across the country here. We were
you guys are the
ones who really broke it open.
I appreciate it.
But But two questions for you here. Out of all the sports bets that are placed, do we have a percentage or a number how much is placed on baseball? And then my second question is, we're talking about the weather, right? And I have to imagine odds makers are factoring in this weather into play, but I see, I've seen a host of Twitter accounts that show where the value is in comparison to what the lines, are placed as.
Anecdotally, you'd have to talk to a sports book to give you like the breakdown of how much, and every book is different right now, especially since mobile betting's legalized, where you don't have to go to Atlantic City anymore. You don't have to go to Vegas to place a legal bet. You could do it. You could take your phone out if you're in a legal state and download an app, whether it's DraftKings, FanDuel, Caesars, MGM, whatever it is. Even certain states have certain ones, Bet365, which is legal in New Jersey and in Virginia and Colorado, but nowhere else. So anyway, depending on where you're at, you can sit from the comfort of your own home on your phone and place a bet, which has increased betting across all sports. We do know anecdotally, at least from doing this the last year, there's more. NFL is the most popular sport to bet. The Super Bowl and opening weekend of the NFL are the two most bet days of the calendar year across the board. Now baseball's a little bit more. I think maybe more people per capita bet football, but baseball has a lot of, I guess it's almost more consistent betting. That you got guys that are betting and ladies who are betting on baseball. Prop bets, every day. You got 162 games a year, so probably, pound for pound, that's probably more bets. But I think the popularity is on football, college football, NFL, just because I think it's a little bit more mainstream for a lot of people to bet, and it's more popular. Baseball used to be America's pastime. I'm in the camp where now football is America's pastime, but we won't get into that debate. But I think, if you're betting on 162 games and you have 32, Major League Baseball teams or wherever we're at now, you're going to have more bets per game, per season in baseball. But again, I think you're seeing more prop bets, more bets on strikeouts. Will this pitcher strike out X number of players? Will this player hit X number of home runs? Rather than are the Phillies going to beat, the Mets tonight? Just because that money line and the run line isn't, it's negligible, and the value that you'll get by betting the Phillies to win is probably not as if you parlayed, how many home runs is Bryce Harper going to hit versus, how many strikeouts, Max Scherzer,
Scherzer.
Anyway, Max Scherzer, goodness. I've got like 7 names popping into my head at one time. This is hard. But yeah, so Scherzer strikes out X and Harper hits X. You can parlay those together and make more, because the odds of both of those happening at the same time are less than if the Phillies would win. So all of that to be said, I think, I guess the percentage of bets are what you also like to bet. Do you like to bet? Are you a bettor who just wants to, watch the game and bet, who's going to win? Because you got a lot of I think, emotional ties to that. If you're a fan, you want your team to win, you might place more bets on them to win versus how this player's going to do. So it also depends on what you like. Are you going to live bet too? Which the influx of live betting, now you can sit on your phone and bet the next inning, third inning, how many outs, how many hits, how many strikeouts. Football, is this, who's going to score first? What's the halftime score going to be? In golf, probably one of, my favorite things to do is sit on the couch on a Sunday and just go hole for hole. Like, all right, is John Rahm going to beat Max Homa on this hole today? Taking all that into consideration, and it's a pretty enjoyable way to watch sport, especially if you're not that big of a fan of that sport. I find myself watching more NBA basketball because of individual bets like that than I would if I was just, a casual fan. And Joe, your second question, it escapes me because I talked too much, so I completely forgot what that second question was.
You kind of intertwined both of them. I was.
There you go.
You're fine. I was really kind of wondering, do we have a dollar amount on how much you actually bet on baseball across the country?
I don't know. I wouldn't know. It's pretty significant, I'm sure.
Yeah, Mike, you mentioned golf, and that's what I kind of want to talk about. Baseball, football, of course, get lots of attention, lots of bets going there, but the betting in golf and maybe other outdoor sports like tennis, what can you say about that? And weather's influence, do you see weather impacting any bets on golf, tennis, other outdoor sports besides baseball and football?
Yeah, I mean, I think tennis, I think it's a little bit, it's harder, something like that, that's smaller space, more confined, the way the arenas are. Now, obviously, rain is probably wind, not so much, maybe a little bit in tennis, but I think golf probably is the sport that is most affected by weather, just on rain versus no rain. Because now you're talking about, will the ball run out on a wet fairway? If I hit the ball, will it stop? Will it plug? Green speed is a huge deal. If it's colder, the ball's not going to fly. Obviously, same kind of thing with baseball. Anytime a ball is in the air for a long period of time, more weather can affect that. You guys know that better than, you guys are the meteorologists here. I just know when I hit a ball high in the air, like I was doing yesterday on the golf course, and it's 30-mile-an-hour wind, if I'm hitting it into the wind, it's not going as far as I'm hitting it with the wind. Right? So you don't have to be a genius to figure that out. We saw it in the Masters too with the rain. How will the scores be affected at a course that everybody knows, but it's really hard, and then it rains, it's colder? How does that affect it versus if you're playing, let's say, the U.S. Open on Father's Day weekend, somewhere in the southern states where it's nicer, a little bit more humid, the ball travels a little bit further. So it all takes into account, but again, it depends on what kind of bet you want to make. If you want to do a player bet, proposition bet, or if you want to bet overall on a money line, who will win, who will lose, that all is into consideration. And Joe, you had mentioned, Twitter accounts and everything like that, and taking in, how does this affect? I think that was part of your second question. There's so much data that goes into, and so much research that goes into this by bettors, by people who make the bets, by people who set the lines, by the odds makers that go into this. Again, in baseball, as you guys know, has stats like what a left-handed batter does on Wednesdays during day games in January or June, I guess, whatever. You throw it out there, there's a stat for it. And now if you're going to bet a lot, if I'm betting $5 or $10, maybe I don't dig into that, but if I'm betting $5,000 or $10,000, which some people do, now I want to know, where am I? What's the effect of? Okay, this is a day game on a Wednesday. How much? Again, educating yourself to be able to place the best bet that you can to maximize your potential of winning.
Man, it's all about the stats, Mike. That's for sure. Now, I want to go back to prop bets for a minute. How these things, you have these prop bets that are happening almost instantaneously, right? Like the next inning, the next hole. To the best of your knowledge, when you have these types of very short-term bets, like this is bet the next 15, 30 minutes, and the weather sometimes, changes really, really fast. I mean, we all know that, especially in the summertime, in the spring, it could be fine for 10 or 15 minutes, and then boom, you got a gusty wind and a shower that kicks in for an hour or whatever.
Right.
Do you know if those rapidly changing weather conditions are incorporated in some of these prop bets in these different sports books? So, for example, if, I don't know, I'm a meteorologist and I know there's a really good chance a squall line is coming through in the seventh inning and that game is going to be canceled, do you think the odds makers know those things as well? I mean, do you have any inkling about that at all?
I'm sure they do. They've got people who are a lot smarter, who do this, have been doing this a long time, and they take a lot of information, and where they get the information is places like us, right? So they come to Richmond.com or the Press of Atlantic City, and they say, okay, what is Martucci saying today about this weather? Okay, so if I'm making an odds, if I'm making a bet, I'm saying, okay, what is Martucci saying about X? Okay, I'm taking that. Then we're going to say, okay, what is Michael Phillips at Richmond, Richmond Times-Dispatch, what's he writing about this? Let me take all this information, because where else are they going to get it? They don't have boots on the ground, so they're reading our information. They're taking all that. They're talking to sources, they're talking to players, talking to people, not players, but people, as much as they can figure out. And then that's what's educating the lines that they set. And then people are also reading up and saying, okay, how is that going to affect this bet or this situation? I think you got a lot of that happening pre-game going in. Now, once you get in the game, sometimes you don't have enough time to really research a lot of that. Now, if you have an insight, or if you're paying attention, and you have the ability to check something real quick and make a bet, you're gonna get that. But I think live betting is all kind of about a feel of the game, how the game's going, the feel about, like, okay, the wind is blowing out. We've seen this player, every time he gets up, he's hitting a, it's foul just barely down the right field line, and so you're seeing how the game's going, you're seeing all that, and you're taking that in consideration in your live bet, or you just have a gut feel, or you're chasing, right? You lost a big bet in the first inning, now you're chasing the rest of the game to try to make your money back, right? So you've got a lot of different scenarios happening at the same time. The reason golf is, for me, kind of fascinating is because you're playing the same course over 4 days. So by Sunday, I have a pretty good idea of how, let's say, Jon Rahm has played the second hole, right? I know he's birdied it 3 of the last 4 rounds. I know that, the tees are back now, the wind's blowing downhill. If you watch a golf broadcast, it's all about the wind, all about the direction, all about where the holes cut, all about where the tee boxes are. So now I've got 3 days of data that I can say, just as a novice fan, just as somebody who's not doing any research, I'm not crunching numbers, I don't have a spreadsheet, I don't have my abacus out on my protractor, right? I'm just there watching the game, watching the match. And now I can say, oh, I bet he's going to do this. But if I'm more in depth than that, I've already done my research going into that. Now I can make more of a feel bet of how things are going. But for the novice, and that's where really and again, we're not advocating betting as much as we are saying people are doing it. Lots of people are doing it. Lots of money is being spent doing it. So if you are going to do it, here's how we can educate you to make the best bet, or to at least inform yourself enough to where you feel comfortable maybe stepping out there. If you don't want to, hey, that's fine too, because you can read our stuff and talk about it at the water cooler. You can get on the podcast with your friends and talk about it. You can go have a beer and say, oh, guess what, Sublette, he was, it's some of my some of the most funny things is last year when we first started doing this, we launched Super Bowl week of last year. And then March Madness was right around the corner. So I filled out my bracket, and I posted online, and all right, everybody. So I was hanging out, went to dinner on the Friday night of the first round of the tournament, and a buddy of mine comes up and he's like, man, I thought you knew what you're talking about. I didn't have time to fill out my bracket, so I just copied yours and filled it out. You suck. And, and I did. And it was terrible. But so it's kind of like you've got people who pay attention to this, and they're like, oh, the Sublette really know what he's talking about. No, he doesn't. I keep track of every win or loss that I have during the football season. I pick against the field, against the spread, and straight up money line. And, and so if you're going by my picks, some weeks you're happy with me, some weeks you're not. But again, I try to do as much research and educate myself as best as possible to provide that, just like you guys do, right? You're not waking up one day going, oh man, it's cloudy, it's probably going to rain. You guys are doing your research. You have all the tools at your disposal. It. You've been around the game. I've been around college and professional sports for more than 20 years. So you kind of get that feel into it. And just like, fans, you watch, some people only bet on the team that they know. Some people only bet on their team because they're like, I've watched this team long enough to know what's going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. You really want to have as much information at your disposal as possible. We'll get more into that on the second side of this break, but stay with us. We'll be right back with Mike Sublette, General Manager and Content Director of Front Page Bets here at Lee Enterprises on the Across the Sky podcast. We'll be right back. And we're back on the Across the Sky podcast. Our guest this week, Mike Sublette, General Manager and Content Director across the hall as we're over at Front Page Bets here at Lee Enterprises. That's our sports and sports betting portal to educate, inform, and entertain sports fans in the blossoming sports gambling and gaming enterprise. Mike, we talked a lot about sports with golf balls, baseballs, basketballs, footballs. But what about auto racing, right? I got to think NASCAR racing is specifically track temperatures, things like that. Do we see much of an impact in the weather impact, knowing how that's going to play out with specific drivers or specific tracks? Any information on that?
Yeah, I think, anytime you're talking about 45, 43 vehicles going very, very fast in close proximity to each other, any little change in weather, track temperature, tire wedge adjustment, tire pressure is going to affect something massively, right? You get that big of speed, that many things happening at one time, 1 little degree, 1 pound of wedge, 1/2 pound of torque here, whatever it is, it can have a big impact. We see it a lot, especially at the super speedways, like Talladega was 2 weeks ago. You get the fastest track in NASCAR, 2.55 mile track, right? And the drafting and the amount of speed that they can garner up when they're in line with each other, nose to tail, And if you watch it, I mean, they are touching each other, going 200 miles an hour. So everything is, you got to take into consideration for an outcome there for safety reasons, one, but then also what car is doing the best in that condition. Because some cars really run well while they're by themselves. Some of them run better in a pack. Some of them run better in front, back, side, left, high line, low line. So all of that kind of stuff taken into consideration. We talk about the weather. Obviously, are they going to even race? We saw Dover was postponed. The Dover race at the Monster Mile was supposed to be Sunday afternoon. It got postponed to Monday. So will they race? They won't race if it's wet. If it's raining, too much danger. They're talking about wet racing condition with tires and stuff. That's still, we have not seen that. And I think if you ask any driver, they don't want to take any more chances out there, safety hazards, all that kind of stuff. So if it's raining, if it's cloudy, sunny, the track temperature warming up, and a lot of things happen when a track goes from day to night. And we don't see it in too many races. Charlotte is probably one of the only tracks on Memorial Day weekend that we see. The race starts in the day. It's a 600-mile race, the longest race that they have on the NASCAR circuit. Starts in the daytime. Track temperatures are usually a little bit hotter. They're rolling, and then it goes to night. Track cools off. You see the track change. It's almost two different races at Charlotte from night and day. We saw it even at Richmond. Richmond races used to race at night. Not the best racing. Cooler track temperatures. Tires would get eaten up a little bit more. Kind of somebody would get out front and stay out there. Better racing in the day, hotter track temperatures, tires, matter a lot more. So you have that. So when are you racing? Are you racing in the day? Are you racing at night? Are you racing day into night? We see it at Darlington as well, Labor Day. You see a lot of those track temperatures. The early spring races, it's cold out there. How does that affect, and then the fall? How does it affect running, a race, in 90 degree heat, and then the track temperature is probably 120 inside the car. It's even hotter than that. You see, how does that affect the driver? So there's so much in NASCAR. Now, when it comes to betting, it's hard to really gauge that unless you're super into it, unless you really geek out. But you can talk about live betting, you see how a driver or car is doing at a certain track. You go in and saying, this driver's got a lot of success there. Maybe their car's not running real well in the corners. Somewhere like Bristol, where you have to have a better turning car into the corner, a smaller track, versus a super speedway like Daytona or Talladega, where you don't have to have much turn. You just have to find the right line and hold it steady. So a lot of that comes into play, but you could see that more live than you do pre-race going into that, because you want to see how that car is going to perform, especially when there's 40 other cars around it.
And Mike, sticking with the racing theme, let's talk about horse racing a little bit, because I imagine there's some similarities here, but also some important differences. So how about weather and horse racing?
Yeah, I mean, track surface, right? Like, are they running like at the Kentucky Derby? They're running on dirt and mud. Were they running grass? Are they running on, what kind of dirt? What kind of sand? All that plays into effect. If it's raining, muddy, vision, how do the horses run? Do they like to get wet, or is it hot? How do the horses fare in the heat? And when you're talking about, again, uncontrolled, and it's not like the horse can tell you, like, yeah, I feel great today, right? You can tell by how it plays, just like a car. You can't tell how it's going to run until you kind of get out there. Maybe you hear something, you feel something. That's why the jockey is so important. I think in horse racing, we got the Kentucky Derby coming up on Saturday. What's the weather going to be like that for that? How is that going to play? Even the wind, like running into a headwind, how is that going to affect it? Also you want to get on the pole too early, you get on the rail, you're in trouble. Too late, you got to make up a lot of ground coming across the field. So all that plays into effect. And you talk about the Kentucky Derby coming, one of the most fun days, one of the most bet days as well, because even if you're not a horse racing fan, you're there, you're like, hey, I'm throw. And if you bet last year on the long shot to win the Kentucky Derby at 80-1 odds, nobody did that on purpose, by the way. They were just doing, I'll throw $10 on the long shot, but nobody who knew what they were doing actually bet, the long shot. And so I think you kind of have, again, what bets are you going to make? And then are we going to have some fun? You want to watch the Kentucky Derby, you want to watch a sporting event. It's a little bit more interesting, or a lot more interesting, if you've got money on it. Right? If you're not betting on it, it doesn't matter. You throw a couple bucks down, now you're vested. You want to know, all right, this better win, we do. And so, but you also got to look at the history, right? We talked about the data, horse racing especially. How do they run? How do they run at this mile? How do they run? Do they have any other races that we could, look at? What about the jockey? What about, the track conditions? Some race better on grass, those kind of things too. So you're looking at all that information as you go. But, horse racing, you can't bet live. post time, you're in, and whatever you bet, that's what you bet.
Hey, Mike, talk to us. This isn't weather per se, but talk to us about the difference between betting and horse racing. I think it's called pari-mutuel betting as opposed to what you see when you are, betting on baseball or football.
You can bet on a horse to win. You can bet on a horse to win place or show, which is first, second, or third. You can bet trifecta boxes where our superfectas. You can bet, all right, these 3 horses are going to finish in the top 3 somewhere, right? You can bet exactas. This horse is going to finish exactly in this position, right? So, and the more you add to that bet, the worse the odds are going to get. So the more payout you can have. So, you and it's more fun to bet horse racing, in my opinion, at the track, right? The buzz, everything's going around. You might have a mint julep or 2, and you're feeling great. You get to the window, and you're like, all right, here we go. 6 horse in the 7th race, whatever. And then you got the person behind the counter. If you screwed up, they look at you like you can't make that bet. So that's really kind of intimidating. So you got to know what you're talking about. You got to get in there, but it's really fun. My brothers and I took my dad 2 years ago to Kentucky for a bourbon trail tour, right? We somehow ended up at Churchill Downs on a Friday, matinee race. We somehow found our way to the ticket line and with a few drinks in our hand and had a really good time. Now, had my brothers ever bet on horse racing prior to that? No, because they'd never been to a track, or if they had it, they never went in. But since we were there, like, oh man, we got to bet. We're here, right? So you get caught up in that kind of thing. And I think that's where you start talking about the popularity, Sean. You mentioned it, the blossoming sports betting world. People are finding out that, if you do it responsibly, you make wise choices, you don't get yourself into trouble, you set a limit, all those things, it's fun. It's enjoyable. It's populated. The sports have gotten more popular because of it. I think you're seeing a lot more. You can't watch a sport now without seeing a DraftKings ad or a FanDuel ad. And obviously they're marketing to those constituents, but they're also because people are finding like, hey, this is fun. And the sports are growing and more people are being involved. And I think, as long as you do it responsibly and make sure that you set yourself a limit, it's fun to do. That's why when I go to a horse track, I carry the cash that I'm going to spend. I leave my wallet in the car because I know, like, especially if I'm losing now, I start chasing. I'm like, oh man, I got to make my money back. It's just like you go to the tables in Vegas or Atlantic City, Joe. I know you've been down to the Borgata. You've been sitting there. And,
I get around a little bit. Like,
I'm just saying, you're there. You bet long enough, the house is always going to win. So you got to make sure you're setting yourself in position to at least, maximize your losses.
Yeah, the one thing I remember when I first went to a casino in Atlantic City when I was 21 years old back in the day, I still remember the signs all over the place, and I forget which casino it was, but the sign was there, said, bet with your head, not over it. And that is what you always have to remember. Yep. Don't bet any more than you think you can lose or you plan to lose. A few times I've been to a casino, whether it was in Vegas or in AC, this is exactly right. You take this amount of money. This is it. After that, the party's over. Go home. Spend it wisely. Risk it wisely. Else you get into a lot of trouble really fast.
You can, Sean. Real quick, just to plug for that though. Now these sports betting mobile apps, they have these parameters on there. They have these. It's almost like a child lock. Like if you gave your kid a cell phone, you could lock it down. You can set parameters where you could set a bet limit per day, a number of bets per day. You go in there, you set that stuff. So when you're at your limit, it won't let you do anymore. And you can't bypass that unless you have the code. But if you're doing it right, have somebody, accountability partner, somebody set that up for you. So there are these things that take into account where you can't get in over your head. And so that's why I think it's so regulated. Sports betting is so regulated, especially in New Jersey, Joe. You guys got some of the strictest rules, which I think are really valuable to have because you've been doing it for so long. You know the pitfalls. But again, you want people to do it responsibly. So the more you regulate it, and you could talk about whether it's alcohol or marijuana or anything, regulation is going to really help police some of this stuff where people are doing it anyway. Might as well, if you're going to do it legally, do it responsibly. So it's one of those things too where Sean, to your point, if you're mobile betting, there are those safeties, features on there to help you, really be responsible.
Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to focus on as we wrapped up. For somebody who just is entering this space, they're curious, they want to get involved, but they're going in they're putting their proverbial toes in the water. As we close out, What is some of your suggestion? What are some of the ways they should approach this carefully, tactfully, so it doesn't get out of hand in a hurry?
Yeah, I think what we just talked about, right? Know your limit, right? If you struggle with an addictive personality, I think you got to know going in that, like, you need to make sure that you have some guardrails, right? For anything, right? Like, don't drink and drive, right? Just not stupid, but just baseline rules of, like, don't be dumb, right? And so I think you got that. But I think also, know what you're doing, right? If you don't know a lot about a sport, maybe watch it, figure it out, try to educate yourself as best as possible before you put money down on it. And I think, it's just being responsible, educating yourself, making sure that you're not, and also don't do it in the dark. Make sure people know, don't try not to hide things. Things that are in the light tend to stay in the light and tend to have a lot more of a better outcome where people can ask you about it and those type of things. And seek help if you find yourself, in a position. And chasing is one of the things we kind of joke about, but if you lose early, it's probably best not to chase, right? You go to the casino, you place a bet, you take your money in there, you lose it in the first 5 minutes, that's a tough pill for a lot of us to swallow. Hey, I'm in Vegas for the next 3 days. I lost all my money in the first 45 minutes. Well, you didn't have a plan. Have a plan. Go in there saying, here's the deal. It's kind of like I tell my kids, right? Before you go out, already know what you're going to do if you find yourself in a situation, right? You got to have a plan. You got to make sure that you have an exit plan. You have a plan to, and if you do, what happens if you win, right? That not just lose, but what happens if you win? You got to know when, Kenny Rogers wasn't lying. You got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them. Because if you stay long enough, you're gonna lose. And so I think that's why you just got to be smart, talk about it, educate yourself. Listen to stuff like this. Listen to podcast. Again, there's plenty of podcasts. There's plenty of information out there about sports betting, but also about how to make sure that you're doing it responsibly. So just do that. And don't. And the other thing I'll say is don't take my March Madness picks. It's the only other thing.
What you said there, have a plan. That is something that is very good for all kind of risk, right? Because all risk is gambling. There is risk in the world, whether it's weather risk, whether it's sports gaming risk, there is risk. Have a plan. Be ready for whatever is out there, and so that you are prepared when it does hit, whether it's good or bad. Mike, before we wrap up, where can people find out more about Front Page Bets?
All right, frontpagebets.com, all one word, frontpagebets.com. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook at Front Page Bets. And it's just, we've been doing this a little bit more than a year here at Lee Enterprises. We've grown audience. We're having a lot of fun with it. We're getting really good feedback. And so I'm excited about it, excited about, educating and informing people, having fun too as well, doing podcasts like this, doing videos that we do. It's really fun. And sports are supposed to be fun, right? And especially, when you take the weather in consideration, there's a lot of times that weather is not fun. And it's there's a lot of things that can go wrong. Same thing in sports betting, but, we're here to educate and we're here to inform you guys. And so just like these fine meteorologists that are on with me, you guys, I check out Sean's, live in Richmond. I check out Sean every morning, his weather video. What do I need to do? And so I just, I really appreciate you guys having us on in frontpagebets.com and on social Front Page Bets. And, we'll hope to see you guys soon.
Thanks, Mike. So much good information for those getting into this space, understanding this space, because it can be overwhelming. So thanks so much. We will talk with you again soon, Mike.
All right, guys. Thanks a lot.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your Astronomy Outlook.
Activity on the sun's surface is increasing. And this is expected as we progress through solar cycle 25, the approximately 11-year-long period where activity ebbs and flows. What isn't expected is the rate at which that activity is increasing, measured by counting sunspots. If you visit NOAA's Space Weather Prediction Center at swpc.noaa.gov, click on Products and Data, and then Solar Cycle Progress, you'll get an interactive visualization of the number of sunspots that are observed each month. You also see predicted rates and a confidence interval. Also notice that observations are far above those predictions, sometimes double. Sunspots are cooler areas on the sun's surface, still about 6,500 degrees Fahrenheit, But they're significant because they indicate blockages deeper within the sun's core that are preventing heat from making its way to the surface, at least in a straight line. That energy, it's going to make its way out, usually by going around the sunspot, and as that happens, the field lines of this magnetically charged energy twist and tangle, sometimes causing violent releases in the form of space weather, which can impact Earth. So is this a blown solar forecast? Maybe. But solar weather prediction is in its infancy, especially when compared to other forms of meteorology. This might be a particularly active solar cycle, which is interesting because the previous solar cycle, which ended in September 2020, marked the least active in a century of observations. Or maybe we got that September date wrong, perhaps by as much as 6 months. And this increased activity is just that expected upslope, shifted a little bit earlier. Either way, we'll get more of an answer in 2025, as that activity is expected to reach a solar maximum. The peak there is measurable not only by the number of sunspots, but also as we watch the sun's polarity flip. The North Pole will become the South Pole and vice versa. Magnetically speaking, of course. That's your astronomy outlook. Follow me at RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
So I learned a lot from that interview, that discussion with Mike. I had not thought about that much with tennis and golf. As we said at the outset, the classic baseball and football immediately come to mind, but I really had not thought about those immediate bets during a golf tournament, guys.
Yeah, some of them were interesting. I actually really like the NASCAR one with the difference in the track between the day and night. I'm not like a big NASCAR fan, but I didn't realize the impact that the day and nighttime timing had on, the track conditions and how you bet for it as a result. So I thought that was pretty cool.
I tell you what, I'm not a big sports bettor. I did it once when I went to the Kentucky Derby. I had to place a bet being at the Kentucky Derby. I've also done it a couple times when I've been to Vegas, just because, you're in Vegas and got to bet. Let's do some sports betting. College football, that was kind of fun. But every time I've done it, I've not, well, I've won, but I placed multiple bets, and that's where I fail and I lose money. So I am not a big sports bettor. And boy, after listening to Mike, I'm more intimidated now, thinking about all the different things and all the ways weather could impact the outcome. I'm like, no, that I'm making the right choice in not engaging on it. Sports betting on a regular basis. It would not end well for me.
Yeah, as he said, you've got to be very careful. This stuff has gotten so big, so fast. If you don't go into this very carefully and very deliberately, it can take hold of you and go very bad. So his recommendations are certainly well taken. Because I'm like you. I used to be much more of a big sports head when I was in my 20s and very early 30s, but I just don't pay as much attention as I used to. So the temptation isn't there for me. I do the occasional football wagering, but it's not that big. Certainly not as big as it is Jersey there, Mr. Martucci.
Hey, listen, man, I'm I have a group chat with like 9 of us, and there's a lot of sports betting talking. And I think it's just a different, we're just used to it, with Atlantic City here for so long. It's just a different way of life. But I have to ask you, Sean, what determines very early 30s? Because I'm wondering if I'm exiting that scope of very early 30s.
I'm going to say 32. After 32, you're not in your early 30s anymore. You're toward the mid 30s.
Okay, all right. So I got another year because I'm 31 now.
The other thing is
I can like sports.
Is you also don't have children, at least not yet, and that will take up a lot of time if you and Shawnee decide to go in that direction.
Yes.
That also takes up a lot of time that I used to use, a lot of brain cells I used to use to pay attention to sports. I had to start paying attention to small children.
Right.
So that's another big thing.
Right. I understood. One thing too, and I forgot to ask him, weather impacting the hot dog eating contest on 4th of July. That makes a difference. Sean's shaking his head at me. I'm telling you, there's a difference, and I think I'm going to reach out to Major League Eating. I think we're going to do a podcast on this. We're going to see. But there's something there, because you can bet on the hot dog eating contest, too, There are lines out there.
That's nasty. I'm sorry, man. That stuff's nasty. I can't watch that stuff. I just can't. I mean, if they all want to do it, knock that stuff out, man. But that, I can't watch that stuff. What they do to the buns, you get the buns and the what is that, man? I'd rather do almost anything else than that. That's just awful.
It doesn't look enjoyable at all. I agree.
No, man. I mean,
no.
Oh my gosh. Okay, let's wrap this up because I don't want to get into that any further. We've got some cool things coming up in the pipeline. Tropical cyclones in the Mediterranean Sea. We don't think a lot about hurricane formations, tropical type formations, and the Mediterranean. We're going to be talking about that in the coming weeks. And also, we've got a guest in the pipeline from Penn State who has been studying hail forever. So we're going to talk about hail in the weeks to come. So lots of good stuff coming up there in the next coming few weeks here on the Across the Sky podcast. But for now, for my colleagues in Atlantic City, Joe Martucci, Matt Holiner in Chicago, I'm meteorologist Sean Sublette at the Richmond Times-Dispatch in Richmond, Virginia. Thanks for joining us on the Across the Sky podcast.
You are getting sleepy. Your CPAP mask is clamped tightly to your face. You will not toss and turn through the whooshing. You will not throw the mask.
It's not working, Harold.
People who struggle with CPAP have partners who struggle too. Luckily, now there's Inspire. No mask, no hose, just sleep.
When I snap my fingers, you will remember to visit inspiresleep.com.
Inspire is not for everyone. Talk to your doctor to see if it's right for you and review important safety information at inspiresleep.com.